Welcome to the Advancement Podcast. This is Taylor Schote with Tim Ware, the president of Advancement Coaching and Consulting. Today, we will be discussing practical insights for pastors and church leaders to advance your life, your work, and your ministry. Are you ready to advance?
Sitting in for Taylor Schote today is guest host Chad McAninch. We want to thank our sponsor today, Magnolia Church in Port Neches, Texas, and Pastor Robert Montgomery.
Welcome to Advancement Podcast with guest host Chad McAninch, stepping in for Taylor Schote in his absence, the lead pastor of Connect Church, not the teaching pastor, as was said in the previous episode. So I thought, take the moment and let's just kind of correct things right out of the box.
Well, I apologize. You had only been lead pastor for 2 months, 2 weeks. 2 weeks. So for me to feel bad about it is not a big deal. Well, I guess it is a big deal if I feel bad about it. To have made the mistake, I should know you well enough. So I guess I just owe you an apology. I'm so sorry. Forgive me. Please.
As a millennial, how sensitive I am. So I will take your apology and let's get started on the day. What are we talking about today?
How sensitive you are. Never mind. You shouldn't have said that because I have some stories that have just came rushing into my head from previous times we've spent together that are now going to cloud me for the rest of our day, maybe. Anyway, so today, last time we talked about some simple things to do leading up to Easter and like that last 6 weeks, and we set up because one of those things was to make sure you had a follow-up plan. And so really the question that I get asked a lot of times when I tell people that, because I'll be meeting with pastors or leaders and I'll say that, they'll say, so what? Okay, let's talk about the backside of an Easter or even a big day, but let's just use Easter since this is, this episode is going to air on March 25th. And so we're really about 4 weeks out.
Yeah.
From this huge day in the church, in the American church especially. I'm glad we're talking about it because, to be honest, I think that sometimes Easter is the greatest opportunity we have, but because of the way we approach after Easter, it's often the biggest missed opportunity that we have. We put so much energy into that day that sometimes we've forgotten that day is not, that we haven't fully planned that day until we've planned beyond it. And so you have this big ramp up to Easter Sunday, and we haven't put the amount of planning into the backside, and so you end up with this drop off. I know a pastor. He really took a lot of things This is a few years ago. He was taking a lot of things we were talking about very seriously. In a church of about 100, and they had nearly 300 people on Easter Sunday. It's a tremendous day.
Absolutely.
But they did not retain anyone because they put so much energy into that day. They didn't put any energy into what do you do on the backside. That'd be like the farmer saying, okay, he's putting all his energy into the day he cuts his crops. But he forgot, I actually need to get it in the barn. What's the other part? Going out. If you just cut the hay, because we've got hay fields out where I live. If I just cut the hay, but we never bale it, never rake it and bale it, then it rots in the field.
And you've wasted the harvest.
I've wasted the harvest. And so I think sometimes that's what we do. So you were sitting there and said you were excited about being in about this next podcast. And so the first thing I have to say is that nowadays, because of that guy I was just telling you about, I tell people that if you haven't planned past Easter, you actually haven't planned Easter.
That's so good.
If you haven't planned beyond it, really you're talking about that next 3 to 4 weeks. When you're planning Easter Sunday, you're planning a big day of any type of a harvesting moment in your church, it has to include 3 to 4 weeks beyond the actual event, beyond the actual peak moment, that's the time where you're working to capture, where you're working to retain, you're working to assimilate, you're working to create disciples. All of those things there's a critical mass moment in those few weeks that come after that.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that, in talking, I know that for us, one of the things that I'm gearing towards is wanting to make sure that we can get people involved into the life of the church. You use the word assimilate. I think that's the big fancy word of how do we take care of the people who have come through the doors 12 o'clock, after Easter, the after Easter service. What do we do from that point?
Well, there's, I think right now, one of the most popular things, Church of the Highlands out of Georgia, they're doing, they've got, everybody's wanting to do follow their steps, their different things that they're doing. And, they've got what they call the growth track. And one of the things that has made them the fastest growing church in America is that they are able to take a first-time guest who gets involved in their system and put them in, they'll have them serving in ministry in 12 to 14 weeks. So there's a lot of good pieces in that. I think the number one thing that you have to do is you have to realize there's two things that you have. Hopefully there's guests and then there's new converts. And some of the things that we were going to talk about actually will apply to both, but there's obviously some differences. The number one challenge that you have is you actually have to figure out how to get their information, how to contact them back. If you don't, if you don't know them when they come in the door, how are you going to follow up with them? Now, you're not ever going to everybody's not going to fill out a guest card,
right?
No matter how hard you try. Not everybody's going to fill out a guest card, but you actually have to ask the question, how can we get information from the people that come in so that we can follow up on them? The reality is you need to create multiple opportunities. If a family has children and they're going to drop their kids off at children's church or they're going to drop them off in the nursery, don't just ask for the name of the child and the name of the parent. That's a great time. You can say, would you give us your cell phone number so that if something goes on, we can text you during service. Now, pastor's going to ask you to put your cell phone on silent, but please keep it out so that now I just got their contact information, and we'd like to send your child a birthday card. Put them in our database so they get an extra birthday card from us. Now I've gotten their address. They've given it to me because of their child, not because of I don't need them to fill out a guest card actually in that moment because I've got all their information.
Wow.
So another way is some people, whether we like it or not, some people, we're not asking them necessarily. I know churches that will say, well, if you're a guest, we don't expect you to give in the offering today. First of all, don't ever say that, Pastor. But we're not talking about finances today. But another place is if someone doesn't fill out a guest card, if they give, whether they give online, because if they give through a text to give or they give these forms, you have them fill it out and you can get that same information. So we need to create multiple streams so that we actually can have the information for the people when they come. Because if we don't know who they are, then we actually don't know how to. We actually haven't created an opportunity to harvest them or to let them be a part of the harvest and be assimilated into the church. And most churches, especially smaller churches, fully and totally rely on a guest card. Or I like to use the term guest and not just visitor card. But that's just me personally. So I think the reality is you have to have multiple streams to try and connect with people. I've been to one church where they won't meet them at the door, and instead they give them a bulletin, but they've trained their greeters with the right question that says, hey, it's good. You never want to say, we haven't seen you before.
Yeah, right.
Or we haven't seen you in a long time. But you want to say, a phrase is, hey, welcome today. Is there anything I can help you with today? Is there anything I can help you? If they've got children, do you need me to help you get to the nursery or get to the children's church? It's not saying that they don't know where it is, but can I help you with it?
Yeah, it's making it about them. It's putting we're here to serve you. It's not about us getting what we can, but we're here to serve you and helping people to understand that this is why we exist. This is why we're here. That's why we have greeters. It's all about having people there to serve you.
Right. So I've been doing some research for some things that I've been communicating to some groups on relationships, and I read a friendship some research on. I've been reading. I don't know. I probably read 15 or 20 different research projects by government and educational institutions that are being done on relationships today and friendship. And psychologists now say that that America has what they call, their phrase, is an epidemic of loneliness. And that the average person over the last 20 years, now they define a close friend as someone that they trust to talk about the important things with. And they say that in the last 20 years, the average American has gone from having more than 3 close friends to less than 2. So what's less than 2?
Not very many.
1 or 0 kind of deal, right? So, obviously, there's decimal points, but the reality is there's been this relational shift. And they actually, one study by a group of psychologists, they said that people who come into a psychologist's office are twice as likely to admit they're depressed than they're lonely. So getting information from people, number one, relationship, this connecting piece is a social dynamic that the church can be an answer to. So it's important that we connect with them. The question is if people in today's world are not as likely to give you their information, or because we're not as relational, which is actually those same studies show as part of the health challenges we're facing in America is tied to that. But the reality is that we still have to find ways. It's our responsibility to reach them. It's not their responsibility to connect to us. So we have to create some avenues, as many as we can, and whatever they look like. I don't think there's a one size fits all. I don't think that you can take what Life Church does and apply, or what Church of the Highlands does, or what Connect Church does, and take it to any other place and go, well, we're just going to do that exact thing, because it's a different group of people, it's a different culture. The principles are what you're looking for, and the underlying principle is that we actually need to find out how to connect to you beyond today, which means I actually have to have some type of contact information. Now, what you do with that, there's a lot of systems. I would say that we feel like in the churches we've worked with, that we find that high touch is actually more effective than high tech.
Kind of tease that out. What does that look like?
Well, it doesn't mean that my initial contact might not be high. There might not be a technology piece, but all right. It's actually, a text is a more personal touch than an email. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I can get their cell phone number, I can text them and say, thank you for coming. High touch means how many people actually where can I create actual personal engagement with people that are going to not just seem friendly, but be friendly. So that interactive piece, so that when we say high touch, that's really what we're talking about. How many personal interactions? So it's not yes, I'm not saying that you don't do form letters and form emails, and those things aren't something that actually has value to it. But what I am saying is that you can't rely on the form letter, because we all recognize form letters and we expect them. And it's not that we don't value them, but they don't replace, and they actually don't measure up, have the same effect that personal touches do. You know, how many studies are out there that still show a handwritten note is more people recognize, okay, they took time to sit down and write this.
Right.
Pastor Todd, who was here sometime back to sit in for Taylor when he was out sick, even though his church is still growing, and they're a growing church, and since they're an over 300 church, and they get guests every week, it's his practice to sit and personally write after every time they connect to a guest. That first week, he hand writes a note to every one of them, a thank you note for coming.
Wow.
So that's when we say high touch. That's what we mean. It's not that we don't want high tech, but you can't rely on technology versus the personal touch piece.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that okay for a millennial?
I think millennials prefer high touch. Technology has made us, just talking about increasingly lonely. We have the high connection and connectivity through the social media platforms. But again, as you're saying in this study, that and I just look across the board at my circle of influence and know that for the most part, it's the loneliness, it's the isolation, which is one of the biggest tactics of the enemy against mankind, is to isolate us, to get us to feeling that no one understands us, no one's ever been there. So understanding that high touch is going to trump that technology. And so I agree with that.
Well, I think, okay, so what we just talked about, that's going to apply to a guest, a first time, a second time, somebody that's visiting us, a guest in our services in our churches. And that same thing will apply to the person that maybe comes to faith and meets Jesus for the first time, or returns to the faith on an Easter Sunday. The difference is I have to make that connection, but what I do with them as part of that connection is going to be a little different, because when I think about a guest, I really am thinking about how do I get them moved from being a guest to an attender to into service and ministry, and to be assimilated as you were into the life of the church, which means they're a regular attender, they're participating, and that's what we're really after, right?
Right.
We want to see the gifts that God's put in every person released into service, and I'm all about that. But for the person that's new to faith, there has to be a connection point to some type of what just happened to me.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Whether it's, I've seen a lot of different systems that work. Some are where we can, the traditional way is we have a new believers class on a Sunday school class, which I shouldn't have said it that way. That sounds very sarcastic, doesn't it?
Very sarcastic. I'll take care of the sarcasm from here forward. You just go ahead.
But that's the traditional thing we would do, and it's not necessarily wrong. In most of the context that I work today in church consulting and training, I'm not sure that it's the most effective way in today's culture, because but that's not to say that it may not work in some circumstances. But you need to have something. I've seen guys, they do small groups. I know people that churches and processes that have individual discipleship. They create mentor components for someone when they come to faith, and when somebody comes to faith, they get a personal touch from one group, but they get a personal touch from somebody that's a mentor designed to help them along in the faith.
Sure.
So there's different methods, but I think we just have to be conscious of the fact that what happens sometimes on the backside of a harvesting moment is we prepared for the harvest, but then we end up in what now? Not just with a new believer, they're not just asking what now, but sometimes we thought we were going, okay, what do we do now that somebody came to faith in Jesus?
Right.
What do we do with them?
I think kind of the word is wanting it to feel organic, that we want those connections to be organic, and to know that this process that we're moving along, even though it can be and should be systematic, we should be looking and helping people to check off boxes. At the same time, everyone's going to move at a different pace. Everyone has different questions. They all have a different history. And knowing that God has put them in this place, He has put them in the care of our church, in our ministry. So how can we organically connect them to the body, rather than let's just have a systematic, again, touch over technology, I think is the way that I hear a lot of people speaking.
Well, in episode 12, we talked about discipleship, and one of the things we really talked about was the fact that we want it to be personal over program. It's not that we don't want to have program, but program is easy because it's just it put everybody through the same thing. But the reality is, as you just said, we don't all mature. We don't all have the same issues. We don't have the same challenges. I think now the reality is, at those very first moments of faith, if we think about, if you go into the neonatal in a hospital, at that moment of birth, yeah, there are some unique cases, but for those first, that at the very beginning, the general need is pretty similar.
Yeah.
It's similar enough that we can kind of put that we can put a little more box. It's as you begin to mature and grow, that's where it diversifies a little more. So to have a process that's designed around the first 90 days even of someone's journey of faith, I think there's nothing wrong with that, because there's a healthy piece to that. You just have to, we just have to realize that not everybody moves at the same pace. But the other piece is we actually need to have a strategy, whether it's, the old thing we used to do, we're going to give them a Bible in this little booklet at the altar.
Sure.
Because we have altar calls. And I still, on a big day like Easter, sometimes I like the altar call component. Now that's me. Maybe I'm just a little too traditional or whatever, but I still kind of like that personally. But the main thing is, you actually have to have thought intentionally about what are we going to do now,
right?
Because as we said earlier, what a lot of people will do is they will think, okay, well, here's what we're going to do to get them to a point of conversion, but we haven't thought, okay, now what do we do with them after? So we just want to say, on that post-Easter, we're talking about, we said that first 3 to 4 weeks after Easter, we need you to think strategically, not just about getting to Easter, but what are we going to do with the guests that come, and what are we going to do with the people that come to faith on that day? I think it's important that we think that way, because that's a release of faith and expectation that somebody actually is going to meet faith.
Absolutely.
Come to faith. And I don't know that everybody goes into Easter, goes into those moments with a confidence that somebody actually is going to come to faith. And that says that I'm doing the work in faith. And Jesus loves to honor faith. When you read the Gospels, he points it out all the time. Your faith, or your lack of faith. So I think that's important. Number 3. The third thing, if on the backside we're going to be intentional about guests, be intentional about our people that meet Jesus, I think the next thing is you have to strategically be preaching, lead pastor, what we call a felt need series. This felt need series is what's important to there was a pastor in his 70s that I was around for a while, and he talked about preaching should be like a swimming pool. He said that you got to spend some time in the shallow end, and you can spend a little time in the deep end, but most of the time you spend it more in the middle where people actually can just stand. They don't have to swim. Yeah. Right?
Right.
And if you're in a church where people have been born again for a long time, they all want to stay in the part where they have to swim and tread water because they can. But the people over here that some of them can't even, they're not even confident enough to go stand in a waist deep or chest deep. We don't need them trying to tread water. So a felt need series, really on an evangelism day, I'm really not worried about the people in the deep. I'm really worried about the people over here in the knee deep water, because this is where people are coming to faith. This is where they're getting in the pool. And this felt need series is still going to lean that direction. I'm going to look around my community, and I'm going to look at the people that the harvest that the Lord is bringing and say, what are the things that connect to them? So in the context of some ministry that Rachel and I have done, we were leading this congregation, and just so happens this loneliness issue is we can see it we can see it really amplified within the community that we're working in. So the Felt Need series is one on friendship, making friends, being friends, needing friends.
That's good.
So we recognize, because we would talk to people in the community, new to the community. We would talk to them, and we would ask the question, so what do you guys do for fun? What do you do with your friends? And we heard again and again and again, 8 out of 10 people said to us, I really don't have any friends. I pretty much just go to work and go home. What?
Wow.
So that's how come I did all this reading on friendship.
Yeah.
Because we realized, okay, so that's a need. So a felt need was a recognizable need in the community that we could address and talk about from a faith perspective. What does the Bible have to say? What are the practical things? So we want this series to be practical. We don't need it deep theology. This is actually part of your assimilation piece, because what I'm able to say on Easter Sunday is either I've started that series that day, or next week we're going to talk about this.
Yeah.
The next few weeks we're going to be doing this, so I can advertise for it, so I can prepare for it. So it's designed for that group of people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think understanding that, hey, this is giving me something. Not only have I invited my friends, my coworkers to this Easter service, or I know some churches, they will do their Easter egg hunt on Palm Sunday, the Sunday before, and leave Easter more as a big day for inviting friends. However, it's done knowing that we're projecting into the future. There's something else that I can invite you to. I know for us, a couple of weeks after Easter, I will actually be out of the country. And so we are leading into that Sunday of doing something that we call Be the Sermon Sunday, where we won't have a preached message, but we'll actually go out into the community. And I'm looking at it as a way to get the people that are involved in a very short period of time in serving together with one another, people they may not know, and serving our community, in hopes that if they'll serve together, if they'll do life together, that they'll be willing to continue to come back and feel a part of the whole.
I like that. I like what you're saying there. The reality is that studies in advertising and marketing for churches, a lot of times around Easter, people do all these mail outs, right? So some of the research from these marketing groups, they'll tell you that the people coming, sometimes that can last 6 to 8 weeks after the actual date, because just because I got it, well, I wasn't thinking about it, but they kept it or they remember. So sometimes having that residual. So what the temptation oftentimes after a big focus on the harvest is to dive back into the deep end of the pool, right, and try and pull in all these things. And the reality is we need to stay on this other edge. And the last thing that I would say, number 4, is that we need to be focusing on we need to do an evaluation. How did we do? So when I'm planning the backside of Easter, I don't want to go too far, because then it gets to be, we can't remember. So in that first 3 to 4 weeks, we want to evaluate what we did up to Easter, how that Sunday went, and how our ramp went, how that day went, and even how our immediate follow-up went. We want to evaluate. Now, we did a whole podcast back in the fall on personal evaluation, and next podcast, episode 16, we're going to dig into just the topic of evaluation. Here around Easter, we've got a great opportunity this spring to talk about the ramp up, and now to talk about the backside. And when we start talking about evaluation, how do we do that? That's worth a whole podcast. So if you have, I tell one group I was teaching recently, I said, if you haven't scheduled, if your evaluation day is not on your calendar, you actually haven't planned Easter.
Wow. I'm going to put that day on my calendar now.
You have to. Okay, so we're coming to the end of our time, and so tell me, what's your takeaway from today?
I really feel that the intentionality is such a key piece to this whole process of the after, knowing that I've got to be intentional about what's happening after Easter process as much as I have to be intentional about the leading up to, and that's knowing that if we're going to pray and have faith, then we better believe that people are going to come, and I want them to be able to have something to come to, not only on Easter, but then to be able to come back to, so ultimately they get connected back to the church.
Right. So intentionality, great word. So let me ask. So the question we want to ask you guys today is, what do you need to do to ensure that you gather the harvest that Jesus brings to you as a leader, as a pastor on Easter Sunday? Thank you, Chad.
All right.
Thank you for joining us today on the Advancement Podcast. The show notes are available on our website at www.advancement.cc, along with other resources. Again, this is Taylor Schote on behalf of Tim Ware and the entire Advancement team. We want you to remember that you are meant to advance.